For years, Western audiences kept waiting for Russians to wake up. They imagined a clear moment. The truth breaks through, people look around and realize what was done in their name. And they say, enough. That didn't happen. But after the massive drone attacks on Moscow and the Moscow region, something did change. People who were trained to ignore the war suddenly felt that the war had found them. So, are Russians finally waking up? And what does waking up look like in a tightly controlled society? I am Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today we'll look at what changed inside Russia after the war reached Moscow's sky. Here's our roadmap. The invisible war. How millions learned not to see what was happening. The loud boom. Why one night of explosions can matter more than years of quiet decline. Moscow matters most. Why fear in the capital changes the emotional weather of the country. Victory meets reality. How drone attacks break the story that Russia is winning. Daddy never fails. Why Putin's system cannot admit that the war came home. The dangerous question: what happens when frightened citizens start asking why they were not protected? If you'd like to keep getting this kind of insights, please subscribe, like, share, join my think tank, or support through PayPal or Super Thanks, or tap hype points. That is how this channel stays independent to dive deep into things. And if you are listening on Spotify, hit follow so the next episode lands in your feed automatically. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. The Invisible War. How did ordinary Russians fail to notice the war for years? It happened because from the first day, the state built a soft wall between the war and everyday life. It was not called a war, only special military operation. That phrase was not just censorship, but emotional anesthesia. War means danger, responsibility, national trauma. Special operation sounds like something handled by professionals far away. This phrasing created distance. If there's no war, then you do not have to ask who started it, why your neighbor's son disappeared near Bakhmut, or why prices keep climbing while television says the country is stronger than ever. You can tell yourself, this is not my business. This is the old Russian political habit. The ruler decides, the citizen adapts. For many centuries, power trained people to live as dependents. Under serfdom, the landlord was actually a parent. He decided where people live, whom they married, whether they could live. The Soviet Union changed the vocabulary, not the reflex. The state became the universal parent. It assigned apartments, jobs, schools, holidays, books, and acceptable memories. Just like in a strict traditional family, children did not get to question the parents' decisions. If they tried to do that, they were punished and served as an example for others not to follow. Putin's Russia inherited that reflex and updated it for 21st century. The state uses internet and social media to tell the same old story. Father knows what he's doing. A father protects the family. Do not bother him with questions. And many people accepted the deal because the alternative was unbearable. Imagine a woman in Moscow scrolling through clips from Mariupol, Bucha, Bakhmut, Kharkiv, Dnipro. If she admits that this is a real war launched by her own state, then she has to ask where she stands inside it. Did she support it? Did she stay silent? Did her taxes pay for it? Did her comfort depend on someone else's destroyed home? That is the heavy door to open. So she does what millions did. She closes the app and says, I don't understand politics. And the state rewards exactly that kind of behavior. The perfect citizen in this system is a child under the blanket, whispering, if I don't look, maybe it won't touch me. And for a long time, for Moscow especially, that almost worked. The explosions and ruined apartment blocks were somewhere else. The mobilized men mostly came from poorer regions. The border areas had shelling, drones, fear, evacuations, but the capital still had restaurants, traffic jams, concerts, shopping malls, beauty salons, airports, and endless little routines that say normal life continues. The special military operation doesn't matter much, but the recent drone attacks on Moscow and the Moscow region broke this contract. They brought war close to home. The loud boom. Why did Russians need a loud boom right outside their window to wake? Because slow disaster rarely wakes a society. People can adapt to almost anything if it arrives gradually, in small steps, rising prices, pay cuts, throttled web resources, airports closing every now and then. All of this becomes part of normal life. A bit harder, but still normal. The drone attack over Moscow was different. It created one emotional moment for many people at once. Someone hears air defense. Someone films a flash in the sky. Someone reads that hundreds of drones were intercepted. Someone else reads that oil infrastructure in the Moscow region was hit. Suddenly, the private fear becomes collective. That is the key difference. When prices rise, everyone notices, but each person explains it separately. The shop is greedy, the West imposed sanctions, life is hard everywhere. What can you do? But when something explodes near Moscow, everyone understands the same thing at once. Father failed to keep us safe. This is where the parental model turns against the state. A school principal can be cruel, corrupt, lazy, and incompetent for years. Children may hate him. Teachers may know exactly how rotten the place is, but if a fire breaks out in the building, all those separate complaints merge into one accusation. You were responsible and you failed. That is what changes after attacks on Moscow. People start asking, why are we not protected? Moscow matters more. Russia is a huge country, but politically, it has one center, Moscow. This is why the drone attacks on Moscow and the Moscow region matter more than similar attacks on border areas, because Russia is built in such a way that pain only becomes politically powerful when it reaches the center. For years, border regions have lived much closer to the war. Belgrade, Kursk, Bryansk, and other areas have heard explosions, seen fires, dealt with evacuations, and watched the front more psychologically closer. For people there, the war was never fully abstract. But in Russia, the regions have no say in how the country is run. All power concentrates in Moscow. In such a system, the suffering of the periphery is treated as background noise. But when drones reach Moscow's airspace, the emotional balance changes. Because Moscow was supposed to be the safe room. Let me explain what Moscow means in Russia with a small memory from my university years. There was a young man in my class who used to arrive at lectures in a black Volga. At the time, that was not just a car. That was a statement. His father was some important official. He always had money. He traveled abroad. The girls looked at him as desirable, glamorous, and completely out of reach. And, of course, he made sure everyone understood that he was above us. Then, one day, someone smashed his car with stones. and nobody felt sorry for him. He ran around asking if anyone had seen anything, but people just turned away with little smiles. Everyone recognized his status. Everyone knew he was untouchable, but secretly, many people were pleased to see his perfect little world cracked. This is roughly what is happening in Russia now. What does it make Moscovites feel? Not guilt or regret, but fear and anger. They ask, why is this happening to us? But even that selfish question matters because it turns the war from television into lived experience. Moscow is full of officials, security people, media workers, managers, relatives of the elite, and ambitious people who feed the system. They may not oppose the war, but they can panic and demand explanations. They can ask why air defense failed, why airports were disrupted, why the state did not warn them, why officials said everything was under control when everyone saw the videos. For an authoritarian system, that matters more than the suffering of ordinary people far away. The Kremlin cannot ignore anxiety near its own machinery. Victory meets reality. For years, Russians were told one story: Russia is advancing. Russia is strong. Russia is fighting not Ukraine, but the whole West, and the victory is inevitable. Go to large pro-war channels, and you will see the rhythm. Russian troops improved positions here. Ukrainian forces were pushed back there. A village name appears, then another, then another. The map shifts by a few fields, a tree line, a road, a ruined settlement. Most readers do not understand where these places are. They do not need to. The emotional message is enough. We are moving forward. While the war stayed far away, this worked. But drone attacks on Moscow create a brutal contradiction. If Russia is winning, why is Moscow being attacked? If Ukraine is a failed state, how does it reach the capital region of a nuclear power? If the army is advancing every day, why are oil facilities, airfields, factories, and airports inside Russia becoming targets? This is where propaganda has to work harder. One popular escape route is the myth that Russia is still fighting with one hand tied. The public wants to believe that the Kremlin has not used its real strength yet, that somewhere behind the curtain there is still a giant fist waiting to strike. This fantasy is comforting. It allows people to avoid the more frightening thought: Russia is already using almost everything it can use, except nuclear weapons, and still cannot force Ukraine to submit. That is impossible for many Russians to accept, because the war was sold as proof of national status. Russia was supposed to be the great power, correcting a historical mistake. Ukraine was supposed to be weak, artificial, confused, ruled by puppets, abandoned by its people, and secretly waiting to return. Then Ukraine did not collapse and fought back. Then Ukraine drones began reaching deeper and deeper into Russia. This is not just a military embarrassment. It attacks the myth at its foundation. The Kremlin spent years telling Russians that Ukrainians were not really a separate people, that Ukrainian identity was fake, that ordinary Ukrainians were confused Russians wearing the wrong national costume. But if Ukraine is fake, then who is hitting Moscow? This is the question propaganda cannot answer honestly, so it answers emotionally. It says terrorists, NATO, Britain, America, foreign specialists, anything except the obvious. Ukraine is a real country with a real army, real engineers, real intelligence services, real anger, and real capacity to hurt Russia back. That truth is poison for the regime, because losing to NATO can still be folded into the myth of Russian greatness. Of course, the whole West had to gather against us. We are that important. But being hit by Ukraine, there is humiliation. So the public demands escalation. Hit the decision-making centers, destroy Kiev, stop talking and do something. In translation, this means make us feel safe again. And here's the trap for the Kremlin. Every act of escalation was supposed to create fear on the Ukrainian side and safety on the Russian side. But after years of war, the opposite is happening. Ukraine is still fighting, and Russian civilians are starting to feel the consequences. Daddy never fails. Putin's system has one fatal weakness. It cannot say, I was wrong. A normal political system can survive mistakes. But in Russia, things work differently. Putin built his legitimacy on the image of control. He is the man who knows, the man who sees deeper, the man who waits while fools panic, the man who takes Crimea, outplays the West, humiliates enemies, restores pride and protects the country from chaos. That image is the foundation. If Putin is just another politician who made a catastrophic mistake, then the whole emotional architecture of the regime begins to shake. Because then people can ask the question, why did one man have the right to drag a huge country into this? That is why the Kremlin cannot admit the obvious. It cannot say we expected Kiev to fall quickly, and it did not. It cannot say we turned Russia into a country where drones can reach Moscow because the war we started came back to us. So the system keeps tightening the same knot. Every failure becomes proof that Russia must fight harder. At the start of the invasion, the regime promised a short operation and quick victory without saying it too directly. Then it promised liberation, then protection from NATO. Each new explanation covered the failure of the previous one. But drone attacks on Moscow expose a different kind of failure. Not only that Russia has not won, but that Russia cannot fully protect itself from the consequences of not winning. This is a much more dangerous embarrassment because the parental bargain was stay out of politics and father will keep the family safe. Now the family hears explosions. Of course, many will not blame Putin directly. The old habit protects him. They will blame air defense, corrupt officials, weak generals, and traitors, but every redirected complaint still carries one hidden accusation. The system does not function as it should. That is where Putin's image becomes fragile. He cannot retreat because retreat would mean admitting that the war was a mistake. So he does what aging autocrats do. He keeps pretending that everything is great, until it is not. The dangerous questions. So did Russians wake up? Yes, but not in the way many people in the West hoped. They did not wake up as citizens suddenly ready to take responsibility for the war. They woke up as frightened dependents, asking why the house is on fire. A moral awakening would sound different. It would ask, what did our state do? What was done with our silence? Who paid the price for our comfort? That is not what we are seeing on a large scale. What we are seeing is more primitive and more politically useful to understand. People are discovering that the war is escalating and not in the way they expect, and that creates a new kind of anxiety. Many frightened people will demand more violence, because violence is the only tool they believe in. They will say, hit harder, answer stronger, stop being soft, wipe them out. The second reaction will be anger at the authorities. Not Putin, but the authorities as a foggy collective body. People will complain that nobody warned them, nobody protected them, nobody explains anything, nobody is responsible. This happens because Russia's citizens usually separate the supreme ruler from the state machinery below him. They can hate officials and still keep Putin clean. I have a dedicated video about how this works. But the more fear enters Moscow, the harder it becomes to keep that separation perfect. The third reaction will be magical thinking. People will cling to the idea that Russia still has some unused force, that it can finish everything if it only decides to, that the Kremlin is somehow holding back out of kindness, patience, or mysterious strategy. The fourth reaction will be silence. Many will simply go deeper into denial. They will stop watching videos and reading military channels. They will focus on children, dogs, repairs, summer plans, groceries, and work. But even silence changes when fear is inside it. Before, silence meant, this is not about me. After attacks on Moscow, silence begins to mean, I hope it doesn't happen again. That is a very different silence. A silence in which people start asking dangerous questions, if only in their mind first. Why did this war come home? Why did the state not stop it? And if father cannot protect us, what exactly is he for? Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever ignored a problem because it felt far away, until one day it reached your own street, workplace, family, or life? If this video helped you understand Russia more clearly, please like the video and subscribe. Share it with one person who still thinks the war can stay neatly contained at the front. And if you want to support this work directly, you can join my think tank, leave a super thanks, support via PayPal, or tap hype points to help this episode travel further. And for those listening on Spotify, follow the show so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. See you next time.